Thank you for the nice introduction. I appreciate it. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to hear about diabetes. There's something new about diabetes that you may not have heard. I was actually really heartened this morning because my sister said that the first thing Kaiser says to do about diabetes is to lower saturated fats in the diet, which is fantastic that they have caught up to the science. But a lot of dietitians and doctors have not yet caught up to the science. But this is something you can do. You don't need a doctor or a dietitian. This is about how you eat. I wrote a book, Diabetes Breakthrough. The key is insulin resistance. And I also have this paper, How Excess Dietary Saturated Fats Induce Insulin Resistance. I'm going to tell you about that today. If you want to read the paper or get the book, I have ebooks under $10 at drsteveblake.com. The paper is free. Just look under the photos at the recent papers and you scroll down a little. I've been busy. If you want to reverse type 2 diabetes, then that would be different than a current medical approach. Current medical approach is to manage diabetes with drugs and a little bit of diet. But the diet is not enough to change it. We all know that if you eat a lot of sugar or fast-releasing carbohydrates, cookies and cake, that your blood sugar will go up. This is very well known. But I'm going to look at the other side. How does the blood sugar get out of your bloodstream and into the cells where it's needed for energy? And this is the problem. Excess dietary saturated fatty acids, more than 12 grams per day on a typical 1,800 calorie diet, they keep the blood sugar high. That's why blood sugar is high first thing in the morning. The saturated fats also keep your liver making more blood sugar, even when it's not needed. The thing is, the studies have shown that you can't really reverse type 2 diabetes if you're still eating excessive amounts of dietary saturated fats. I made this graphic up for you. You can see all those sugar cubes next to the soda bottles. If you were to drink a soda and you did not have insulin resistance, you had nice low dietary saturated fat, that sugar is going to go into your bloodstream very quickly. We know that. But at that point, your pancreas, the beta cells will secrete insulin into the bloodstream. The insulin circulates around to muscle cells and fat cells in the liver, and it tells those cells, drink in the blood sugar quickly. And they do. If you don't have insulin resistance, that sugar is gone from the bloodstream before it can do the harm that happens from excess blood sugar in the bloodstream. So this works. It's better not to eat all those sugar cubes at once. I agree. However, if you're eating that pepperoni pizza on a regular basis, there's a lot of saturated fat in that pizza. The excess saturated fats block sugar entry into the cell. And I will tell you during this talk exactly how that happens, show you clinical trials, and help you to understand that this is what you really need to do. The other side, of course, is that the sugar is needed in the cells so that you don't look tired like this girl down at the bottom of the screen. Many people get incorrect dietary advice. Health professionals, they may not have nutrition training. I talked to a Harvard doctor who only got 2 hours of nutrition training. They recommend eating lots of beef, pork, chicken, and cheese for diabetics. They explain, and I agree, these foods do not contain sugar. So how could they raise blood sugar? Well, because they're rich in saturated fats, they keep sugar in the bloodstream so that it can't get out of the bloodstream, and that's what keeps blood sugar high. Do you know most Americans eat 3 times as many saturated fats as unsaturated fats? It's very, very common. I analyze diets for saturated fats, and we're supposed to get 12 or less, and I strive to do that every day, and it's not that easy, even on a whole plant diet. But I've seen diets 30, 40, 60, 70 grams a day of saturated fats. And that's just so high that it changes the cell membrane shown at the top left of this slide. With less saturated fats, you can get more insulin receptors, and the insulin receptors are able to move the blood sugar out of the bloodstream and into the cell. It's a several step process, and saturated fats interfere in all of those steps. If we can eat less saturated fat, then instead of causing damage to our arteries, our brain, our eyes, and our kidneys, the glucose can increase energy production, and that's what we want. Well, I wanted to show you some clinical trials that illustrate this. How long does it take for saturated fat to raise blood sugar? So if you're eating excess amounts of saturated fat, does it take a week, a month, maybe a couple of years for the saturated fat to increase insulin resistance and stop the sugar from getting out of your bloodstream? In this clinical trial, it only took 2 hours. That's fast. One fast food breakfast high in saturated fat, 20 grams, not an unusual amount at a fast food restaurant, raised fasting glucose 55%. So it went from 90, which is normal, to 140, which is diabetic levels. One fast food breakfast in 2 hours. So you can see at the bottom of this slide and most of my slides, I have direct citations to the studies that I'm mentioning. So you can check me. You should always check me. You should check everyone. Make sure that what I'm saying is right. Go to these studies, read them, and see what happened. See exactly what the breakfast was. It was actually they made a shake up, and some got the shake with the saturated fats and others without, so they couldn't tell which one had the high saturated fats. There wasn't a lot of grease involved. Here's another one. Saturated fat raised blood sugar. In this study, 1 day of eating excess saturated fats, 42 grams, instead of the 12 grams that is recommended by the American Heart Association for protecting your heart. It also protects against diabetes. 1 day, insulin and blood glucose were raised. Now, that is the case with type 2 diabetes. The glucose goes up, the insulin response puts insulin in the blood. You have hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood, and too much glucose in the blood. They're both there, but the insulin is not effective in getting the glucose out of the bloodstream. And this is because of this 1 day of eating excess saturated fats. The insulin resistance persisted overnight and was relieved by just 1 day on a low saturated fat diet. Isn't that interesting? It kind of proves the cause and effect that we like to see. This study was especially of interest because I work at the My Memory Clinic. The saturated fats, this was a 30% saturated fat breakfast versus 6% saturated fat breakfast in the control group, and 100 students. It reduced hippocampal memory. Now, the hippocampus in the brain is a memory center of the brain. It reduced memory 16% in 4 days. So those students who were eating the saturated fats at breakfast reduced their ability to remember their studies 16% in 4 days. Imagine if they keep that up. Now, it's interesting because sugar intake, the sugar from their food went up only 7%, but blood glucose went up 50%. When I say blood glucose, I mean blood sugar. Glucose is the form of sugar in the blood. 50%. It went up from 77, which is nice and healthy, up to 118, which is pre-diabetes level, and over 125 is then diabetes. But that's 4 days. And many people eat saturated fats for more than 4 days, wouldn't you think? In this study, cheese and butter doubled the risk of diabetes. Many doctors will tell you that it's fine to eat cheese and butter because they're low in sugar. But I'm going to have to disagree. This study followed 7,000 people for 6 years, reported in the American Journal of Clinical Medicine. Those who ate more cheese and butter doubled their risk of diabetes. These are the West Maui Mountains, and just a little break. I'm going to try to explain everything in terms today that everyone can understand. There may be a few big words floating around. Forgive me, I am, after all, a nutritional biochemist. What is type 2 diabetes? It's when the excess blood sugar in the bloodstream cannot get in our cells. Now, this excess blood sugar, in the first place, I'm going to give you a 10-step diet in order to reverse type 2 diabetes as we go along today. So the first, yeah, it would be very good if you didn't eat too much sugar and had processed foods that are rich in sugar and fast-releasing carbohydrates. But if you do, and most people do, then you have sugar in your bloodstream and it needs to get into the cells. This is blocked by insulin resistance, so insulin can't do its job. Blood sugar stays high and energy stays low. So you can lower insulin resistance by lowering dietary saturated fats, mostly found in animal fats. Insulin resistance in liver cells results in more blood sugar being created. This is very important. See, the liver cells, they're looking to see if there's insulin in the blood. If there's insulin in the blood, the liver is supposed to stop making sugar. But if it can't see that because of insulin resistance, the liver can be making sugar while your blood sugar is too high. And also, excess saturated fats can kill the beta cells that make insulin in the pancreas. And yet, doctors and dietitians advise more animal foods. I think this advice should be reconsidered in light of the science. You can't reverse diabetes. This has been shown over and over again. If you have diabetes, you've proven it to yourself only by restricting sugar and fast-releasing carbohydrates like white flour, white rice, cookies, cakes, that sort of thing. You also need to reduce saturated fats. And they're found mostly in cheese and meat, but also in coconut oil. It's very high in saturated fat. Also, we need the antioxidants found in whole plant foods. This protects our arteries and our eyes and our kidneys and our brains, the very areas that are damaged when blood sugar is too high, too long, and you form advanced glycation end products, one of which, the glycated hemoglobin, the A1C test, is a standard test for diabetes. When there are more antioxidants in the bloodstream, there's less glycation and less damage from the glycation. So keeping these whole plant foods in your diet is very important. And this, I think, is missed by a lot of advice on diabetes. I'd like you to consider that. So you can eat slow-releasing carbohydrates like oatmeal and brown rice. Beans are very slow-releasing. They have a little carbohydrates, enough to get them bumped off the paleo diet. But the difference is that these carbohydrates are low in amount and slow to release. So as you eat beans, a little blood sugar goes in your bloodstream. It gets burned up. Then a little more goes in your bloodstream. Then that gets burned up. It goes on like this. Your pancreas may not even need to secrete insulin because it's almost self-adjusting that the food is digested and the sugar goes in the bloodstream at the same rate that you're using it up. To beat diabetes, it's best to stay away from animal fat. You can obtain healthy fats from whole nuts, whole seeds, nut butters, avocados, and olives. Those are all excellent sources. And even so, you'll need to note the amount of saturated fat in these excellent sources and factor those into your 12 grams per day. I still eat whole nut seeds, nut butters, avocados, and occasionally olives, but I make sure that I don't eat so much. The peanut butter, for example, you can overdo it. If you eat several tablespoons of peanut butter, you can raise your saturated fats for the whole day. And eat plenty of whole plant foods that protect us. In other words, eat a whole food plant diet, to summarize. This study was done by Dr. Neil Barnard, and it showed type 2 diabetes prevalence with a non-vegetarian diet was the highest. It's the normal American diet. Then the semi-vegetarian diet, 6.1% opposed to 7.6. Then down to 4.8% for a pesco, fish vegetarian diet. Going down to a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet, 3.2. And on this vegan diet, 2.9%. I think you could do better than that because vegan really only tells you what is missing from a diet, not what you're eating. So vegan diets vary in their incidence of diabetes, and I would expect it to be lower on a whole food vegan diet. Diabetes is really epidemic. 38 million Americans have diabetes and 98 million have prediabetes. That means including men, women, and children, 1 out of 3 people has diabetes or prediabetes. And type 2 diabetes makes up almost all of the cases. Type 1 diabetes is where you have a defect in your pancreas. You can't make insulin in the first place. And some of what I say today can be helpful with type 1 diabetes, but it's a different problem. So you need different advice for that. You can see that 350% increase in the last 21 years, 151 up to 537 million. Oh, this is worldwide. That's why. Okay, 537 million people with diabetes worldwide. By the time some people are diagnosed with diabetes, and many people don't know they have diabetes. Usually the first sign is getting up to pee at night too often. But if they do have diabetes and don't know it, there can be damage to the eyes and the brain, damage to the kidneys that may already have happened. So it's good in a precautionary way to eat less saturated fat and more whole plant foods, just to make sure you don't get it, or if you already have it, it doesn't cause damage. Well, we want to avoid these tragedies, and it's sad. It's sad. In the Maduro study, the main use of their hospital on the island was amputations due to diabetic complications. Over time, if blood sugar is very high, it can damage arteries, increasing risk of heart attacks 3 times. It can damage eyes, can lead to diabetic retinopathy and blindness. Can damage kidneys. A lot of the dialysis done is because of kidneys damaged by high blood sugar. Alzheimer's dementia can be increased 1.5 times. And the saddest part is when damage to circulation can lead to amputations. We can do a lot to avoid these tragedies. That's why I'm here today, is to help you do this. Do drugs reduce death from diabetes? This is an amazing meta-study. A meta-analysis, more than 300 clinical trials involving 120,000 adults and 1.4 million patient months of treatment. They found limited evidence that any glucose-lowering drug, metformin or whatever you're taking, prolonged life expectancy or prevented cardiovascular disease. But that's exactly what a whole food plant-based diet does, is lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. These drugs manage diabetes. They keep the blood sugar somewhat down, but they don't stop the deaths from diabetes. So we need to do more than just drugs. This is a peaceful photograph taken in Mexico at sunset. I'm going to tell you about a few trials where they reversed diabetes. Now, by reversed, I don't mean completely reversed, but they helped it really a lot. The first one here, fasting blood sugar went from 282 to 89. Now, at the bottom of the screen, I have in blue, normal up to 100. Pre-diabetes, 100 to 125. Diabetes over 125. So the 282 was really high fasting blood sugar. And the 89 was normal range blood sugar. That was fantastic to be able to do that. I have this studies listed at the bottom of the screen. A plant diet in another study reduced fasting blood sugar from 164 to 128. And the blood sugar is measured in milligrams per deciliter, and it can be measured another way too, but that's going to be the measurement I use throughout this talk. So in 5 months, they lowered it from 164, very diabetic, down to 128, almost into the pre-diabetes level. And if people persist for more than 5 months, they may be able to get down even lower. On a 5-month trial of a plant diet, A1C, now this is glycated hemoglobin, went down from 8.1 to 6.8. They want under 5.7, that's best. It used to be 6, they lowered it a bit. And then over 6.5 is considered diabetes. Well, this study didn't quite get down below the diabetes level of 6.5, but 6.8 is pretty close, and they're moving in the right direction. There's some power here. Brenda Davis in her Maduro study reduced fasting sugar from 236, again, alarmingly high, to 161 in just 2 weeks. And many of these people became diabetes-free and medication-free. I'll tell you about that as we continue my talk today. Dr. Neil Barnard did a study for 22 weeks, and the glucose changed from 163 to 128. weight went down, cholesterol went down, and it was very positive. Now, he uses a very low-fat plant diet. And we have to remember that some of these plants that I've talked about, like avocados and nuts, have vitamin E. Vitamin E is very protective of our bloodstream and our brain and our eyes. Vitamin E is very, very important. And so if you get too low in fat in the diet, then you don't get enough vitamin E. So what to do? Get low in saturated fat, but you don't want to get too low in total fat because then you're not eating the foods that have the protective antioxidants like vitamin E and the carotenoids in order for them, these colorful pigments in plants, to be absorbed. Those are fat-soluble antioxidants. You also need a certain amount of fat above the very low-fat diet. In this study, they reversed diabetes in 1 week. They used a special drink and vegetables. 600-calorie diet. Typical is about 1,800. 600 calories, almost fasting. But blood sugar went from 165 to 106 in 1 week. Interesting, too, that beta cells were revived and able to produce more insulin. I'll tell you some more about the toxicity to the beta cells that excess saturated fats can induce. Liver insulin sensitivity was restored in this study, too. And it is really important that the liver not keep making too much blood sugar. So that was a really good study. In this study, risk of getting diabetes can be reduced 91%. They found that a poor diet, obesity, lack of exercise, and smoking accounted for 91% of the risk of diabetes. This is the Nurses' Health Study with Drs. Stamfer and Willett at Harvard. And the study followed 85,000 nurses for 16 years. Now I'm going to give you 10 steps to change your diet, if you wish to reverse diabetes. And by reverse diabetes, I mean make it better. It may not completely go away. In the first 10 years after diagnosis, you have a much better chance before a lot of beta cells have died off. After 10 years, you may still have a chance to completely reverse diabetes, but it's a little bit harder, it may take a little bit longer. This was done in the Marshall Islands by Brenda Davis, and it worked to reduce it. I actually spent some time on Majuro on this little island, and I have to say that people were not in tremendously good shape. The food, it's an atoll. It's very difficult to grow food. So people ate mostly packaged food. The diets weren't good. There was a lot of overweight. And I remember they did a 1K race where the people were going to run from the start line out 1 kilometer, which is not very far. And when the race was starting, I donated a 5-gallon bottle of water. And so I walked that water, the 1 kilometer from the starting line to the finish line, just about the time they started their race. And I'm sorry to say I won. 2-week transformation. Blood glucose went from 236 to 161. This is only 2 weeks. So healthy would be under 125 or under 100 even, but they moved it down a huge amount. Weight went down a little, cholesterol went down a little, triglycerides went down. But I think the most amazing part is that blood sugar lowering drugs, 27 out of the 30 were taking blood sugar lowering drugs like metformin. 2 weeks later, only 5 needed those drugs. 3 were using insulin, and 2 weeks later, 0 needed insulin. Cholesterol lowering drugs, statins, 13 were using them. 2 weeks later, only 1 had cholesterol high enough to warrant using that. And high blood pressure drugs, 11 people were on them, but only 1 needed them after 2 weeks. Now, the cautionary tale here is that if you were to start doing all 10 of the steps I'm going to tell you, you need to check with your doctor frequently so that he can adjust your medication so that you don't take too much of these things. So here are the 10 steps to beat diabetes. This is inside the Baja Peninsula in Mexico. 1, lower saturated fat. Saturated fats should be kept to less than 6% of calories. That's about 12 grams per day. The 12 grams is easy because almost every food with a package has saturated fat listed right on the package. You can read it, and it's amazing how much some foods have per serving. And sometimes, like on a little carton of ice cream, it'll say 3 servings, but that's 3 1-cup servings, or actually, it's less than a cup. Anyway, the servings are small, so you have to adjust for how much of that you eat. If you eat the whole carton, then you've eaten 3 servings, and you may have gotten 30 or 40 grams of saturated fat in that one small carton of ice cream. You have to keep track of it. Read labels, add up your saturated fats, avoid animal fats and coconut fats, and you'll be well on your way. This is from my book, Fats and Oils Demystified. It's available on my website, drsteveblake.com, in ebook form for under $10. It's a big textbook. I think we should all know the names of the saturated fats, the unsaturated fats, and especially the 2 essential fatty acids. We should know more about our fats. So I wrote this book so we could do that. In this, we find that one hamburger, 12 grams of saturated fat. So you've blown your whole day on this double hamburger with bun. Cheddar cheese, 24 grams of saturated fat, but you get only 12 per day. It's twice as much saturated fat as you should get in a whole day with a modest serving of cheddar cheese. If you're eating pizza, you can eat a lot more than that. Butter, 14 grams. Bologna, 13 grams. These are all too high. Even if you ate just 1 serving of these foods in the entire day and ate nothing else, you'd still exceed your saturated fat limit. Spam's high. Is a local man here reading a Spam can in a store, and he said, "Can you read the saturated fats? I'm supposed to keep it down." And I read it, and it was a little can. And I said, "Okay, it says 6 grams of saturated fat per serving, and that's 1/3 of a can." He says, "I eat 2 cans. How much is that?" Too much. So be careful of those servings. This lady, Tina Kiona, when I joined this program, I was very skeptical, but very quickly I started to feel better. The cramps in my legs disappeared, and I no longer had to get up during the night to go to the bathroom. My sugars kept dropping and are now normal without any medication. My last lab test showed that I am no longer diabetic. People can hardly believe what has happened to me. Kind of nice to hear about someone who beat it, isn't it? And she was skeptical at the beginning. Number 2 on the anti-diabetes diet is to minimize refined carbohydrates. Crackers, cookies, anything made from white flour is going to release sugar into your bloodstream very quickly. A lot of American diets, the refined carbohydrates make up 90% of the carbohydrates that people eat, and almost everything they eat is going to raise their blood sugar very quickly. Another thing about refined carbohydrates, they don't tend to have fiber, so you can overeat. You can just keep eating and eating without ever getting full. If you eat too much carbohydrates, and this is not well known, but I think it's interesting. Let's say you drink a 6-pack of sugary soda during the day. That excess sugar, it can be made into palmitic acid in your liver. That's one of the ways we dispose of excess sugars. And that palmitic acid can then increase insulin resistance and make diabetes worse. So this is one way that sugar creates saturated fats, increasing insulin resistance. Refined carbs that Americans eat too much of, sugary drinks, any food containing sugar and corn syrup. I mean, a tiny amount won't be a problem, but most foods, they put a lot in. White rice is a big problem here in Hawaii, and white flour and all the products made from it. Here's some slow grains. On the top, we have my book, Vitamins and Minerals Demystified, and this talks about the vitamins and minerals that we need for life. I wrote it for McGraw-Hill. And that is also available on my website. It's perhaps just a little more than $10, but it's what they charge. Not more than 20, I don't think, for the whole book. So slowest grains are intact whole grains, like wild rice, brown rice, or oats that have been perhaps chopped but not ground up. Broken whole grains like Steel cut oats would be an example of broken whole grains, and 12 grain cereal. And then rolled oats are a little bit faster releasing, but still not usually a problem. That'd be oatmeal and rolled barley. Then when you get into shredded whole grains like shredded wheat, it's a little bit faster, and ground whole grains like whole wheat flour products, those absorb faster yet. So it's best to stay at the top of these intact whole grains, wild rice, brown rice, oatmeal, those kinds of things. Grains to avoid, white rice. Flaked whole grains like corn flakes. You know, they take corn and when they smash it flat into a flake, it absorbs very quickly. White flour can be in spaghetti, bread, cakes, cookies, in a zillion forms. And puffed whole grains like puffed rice, long a health food staple, actually puffed rice absorbs into the bloodstream and raises glucose very quickly. Here's Marie Madison. When I joined, I could not lift my hands above my head without significant pain. Now I'm pain-free. My cholesterol and triglycerides have dropped to normal, and my sugars are almost normal too. I've lost weight and feel like a new person. I'm now off all medications. It's unbelievable. Isn't that nice? Number 3 on the anti-diabetes diet, maximize whole plant carbohydrates. This image is a good example. Vegetables and beans, mushrooms, onions, bell peppers, these are foods that are going to not raise your blood sugar, but give you those wonderful antioxidants that protect your eyes and your bloodstream, that protect your brain and your kidneys from damage caused by too much sugar, and damage caused by many other things too. So vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and beans, they all have fiber, antioxidants, and vitamins and minerals. If you look around the world, the places with the lowest chronic disease are places that eat food like this. There are 2 indices of sugar in food, glycemic load, which is correct, and glycemic index, which is not reliable, usually just flat wrong. You focus on vegetables and beans, nuts and berries are good. Limit servings of white potatoes and refined grains. Try and get those whole grains or baked grains. Now, the graph below shows fast food like sugar and flour, and they spike your blood sugar right away. This is a 3-hour graph here. So within 1 hour, those foods have dumped sugar into your bloodstream during that hour. Even in a half an hour, it's peaked out. But if you're eating beans and nuts and other slow foods, then over 3 hours, you get a slow increase in blood sugar and a slow decrease in blood sugar, which is just perfect. Doesn't damage anything. Now, glycemic index only looks at how fast 50 grams of sugar, which for watermelon is 5 cups of watermelon, is absorbed. 5 cups of watermelon is quite a lot. Glycemic load, though, the more accurate one, takes into account how much sugar there is in a food. So if you look at glycemic index, watermelon is very high and you shouldn't eat it because it's the incorrect glycemic index is saying don't eat it. But if you look at glycemic load, it shows that there's very little sugar in it. So you want to know, does this raise my blood sugar? That's what you want to know. And no, watermelon doesn't raise your blood sugar. By the time you eat it and chew it and swallow it, it has so little sugar that by the time you get to the next slice, the sugar you've already eaten is all burned up. It does not raise your blood sugar. So you really need to look at glycemic load only and never glycemic index. Unfortunately, many health professionals haven't switched over, and it's been decades since we've known this. Here's a glycemic load for fruit. Now, I think that it's a huge mistake for people to be advised not to eat any fruit on a diabetic diet. Why? Because these fruits, especially the berries and many of the fruits, have antioxidants that are very powerful to protect us. And they're being told to eat no fruit at all. But if you look at the glycemic load, the low glycemic load fruits are oranges, papayas, grapes, pears, apples, sweet cherries, strawberries, and other berries are very slow releasing and have little sugar to begin with. Peach, grapefruit, and plums. Plums are kind of sour, as you know. They have very little sugar. So if you look at this, you can see that the slower fruits are very beneficial for people with diabetes. And now mangoes and bananas are pretty sugary. They're medium in their load, so that perhaps someone with diabetes would want to eat a half or a third of a banana and not the whole thing in order to limit the increase in blood sugar. This study looked at the risk of diabetes of fruit. Now, notice that fruit juice or dried fruit is different. This is only for whole intact fruit that you're chewing up. But the blueberries, 33% less risk in those who ate blueberries for diabetes. So blueberries are very helpful. They're very high in antioxidants. They have anthocyanins that are very helpful to our brains so that we can think clearly. It's a dangerous mistake to limit fruit. Among those fruits that reduce the risk of diabetes are strawberries, oranges, peaches, plums, apricots, grapefruit, bananas, apples and pears, prunes, grapes and raisins, and blueberries. That's a lot of fruit that lowers your risk. And this is good to know, and also quite pleasant. If you've been told not to eat fruit, now you can eat the slow-releasing fruit. Lorac was a pilot. My pilot's medical certificate was denied when I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I'm 38 years old. I became a participant in the diabetes wellness program, completely changed my diet, and began a daily exercise program. Upon my last physical checkup, I was told I'm fully recovered. My pilot's license certificate was approved. My fasting blood sugar is below 90 milligrams per deciliter, well in the normal range, with no medications. I no longer have diabetes. I have my career and my life back. It's inspiring, but do notice that he said I completely changed my diet. And if you have diabetes, it is somewhat likely that your diet will need more change, not just a little, okay? Because this is a diet-induced illness. Number 5 on the anti-diabetes diet is a high fiber diet. Now, the RDA for fiber is 20 grams per day, but we're recommending at least 40. That's what I consider a healthy fiber intake. Fiber is really beneficial. It improves blood sugar control. When you eat a food with fiber, the blood sugar is introduced into your body very slowly. Fiber increases fullness, so you tend not to overeat. Fiber ushers cholesterol out of your body by binding to cholesterol in the intestine. And fiber obviously improves digestion, reduces constipation. Lower fiber ranges, say the RDA of 20 grams per day, may not be sufficient for blood sugar control and keep things down. So oatmeal with nuts and a few raisins here is a lot of viscous fiber. It is the viscous fiber we're talking about. Wheat bran and cellulose fiber doesn't help with this, but viscous fiber helps to control blood sugar after eating. Beans, barley, oats, and flax seeds were used extensively in this anti-diabetes diet. And fruits, nuts, and vegetables, of course, have great fiber too. There are low fiber foods, and then there are zero fiber foods. Low fiber foods are like refined carbohydrates, white rice, white flour. They have a little bit of fiber, but not much, not enough. Zero fiber foods, meat, poultry, fish, any animal product, cheese should be in there, has no fiber at all, zero. Dairy products and eggs, there it is, no fiber at all. Sugar, zero fiber, it's all taken out. And oil, zero fiber, it's all taken out. So avoiding zero fiber foods is a good idea. I'm not saying absolutely zero sugar, but keep it down to a very small amount. Now, number 6 out of 10 on the anti-diabetes diet, how to do it yourself. High-fat diets. You don't want to look like this kitty. Too much fat increases oxidative damage. The fat, when it gets oxidized, creates malondialdehyde, which can cause DNA adducts and increase risk of cancer, for example. The high fat contributes to insulin resistance. It's not just saturated fats that can damage beta cells that make the insulin, but if you just have way too much fat in your diet, that can also damage the cells, the very cells that make the insulin. And of course, too much fat, it's hard to lose weight if you're eating too much fat. This amount of fat, 20 to 25% of calories, looks just about perfect to me. I've analyzed diets with my own Diet Doctor software tool that I created for this for many decades. And I've analyzed many diets. I think the lowest was maybe 8% of calories, and the highest, oh, way too high. In making up diets and trying to see what's the lowest diet where you can get just the essential fatty acids, 17% of calories, it's the lowest that I can design a diet in order to get the essential fatty acids and vitamin E in sufficient quantities. So any recommendations below 17% can't possibly meet human needs for essential fatty acids and vitamin E. So 20 to 25%, you can meet human needs, and it's still nice and low enough for you to keep your weight down. So in this study, they stopped refined oils and spreads like butter and margarine, and any refined oils. Can get your fats from nuts and seeds and avocados and nut butters and whole foods. Number 7 is to avoid trans fats. And trans fats from industrial hydrogenated oils have been reduced in the United States. That's a good thing. Did you know that beef and dairy products have trans fats, and that may be the major source of trans fats, the very same trans fats that are in hydrogenated oils? And that may be the biggest source for some Americans. It varies from 40 to 60% in some countries. So you want to avoid them, both the beef and dairy product source and the partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. If you eat them, they can reduce the number of insulin receptors on your cell membranes, just like saturated fats do. I'll show you an image later. They raise blood cholesterol, increasing risk of heart disease, increase inflammation, and that can contribute to insulin resistance. Sources of trans fats, 40% comes from cakes, cookies, crackers, pies, and bread. And this is from partially hydrogenated oils added to those. 21% in America from animal products. I noted that it was 60% in Australia and 40% in Canada. Margarine can be a contributor, and then the others, fried potatoes, potato chips, less of a problem for trans fats. Now, number 8 on the anti-diabetes diet is getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. We know that there are 2 essential fatty acids for humans. Do you know what they are? One of them is an omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid. This is only obtained from plants. No, fish don't have any. And then we can take that omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid and we can make the EPA and DHA and all of the eicosanoids from that, and docosanoids as well. The omega-3 fatty acids improve the cell membrane that can increase insulin sensitivity. I'll show you an image here in a little while. So include plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids, 1 tablespoon of ground flax seeds. I recommend organic flax seeds because did you know some flax seeds have been genetically modified? And a handful of walnuts is a great idea. If you're having digestive problems like bowel pockets, you might want to grind up the walnuts. And of course, you need to grind the flax seeds just so they're digestible. About 3 grams of omega-3 fatty acids should be included in the daily diet. Most people don't get that much. But if you get more, you can help your insulin resistance and make those cells more sensitive to insulin, getting sugar out of your bloodstream faster. So walnuts just can by themselves get you enough of these omega-3s, 2.7 grams per ounce, 1 ounce. Flax seeds are good too. Flax seeds, 2.6 grams per tablespoon. Hemp seeds, a little bit less, and leafy greens. I've heard some experts say you can get your omega-3s from leafy greens, but at 0.1 gram per cup, someone has a calculator, they might find out that you need about a 5-gallon bucket of leafy greens to get your omega-3s for the day. And unless you're a cow, I don't think that's going to happen. Leafy greens are great. They're great food. They're great for you in a million ways, but they're not very helpful with omega-3s. Now, I want to talk a little bit about fish and EPA and DHA. A lot of people think that if they eat fish, they can get their omega-3s. This study, I looked at this study over and over again. It's in Diabetes Care. a journal, and the risk of diabetes was increased 38 times from the pollutants in fish. DDT, polychlorinated bipheноls, organochlorine pesticides. In a large national health examination survey, those who had more of these pollutants had 38 times the risk of diabetes. Now, it might not be such a good idea to eat fish since they're so polluted. That's my point with this slide. Where are these polychlorinated bipheноls? And now they have a newer polybrominated diphenyl ethers. That's a mouthful. Call them PBDEs if you want. Where do they come from? The biggest source is fish oil. So a lot of people are taking fish oil for their health and not realizing that they may be getting large amounts of these and also the organochlorine pesticides, DDT, dioxins, concentrated, bioaccumulated in fish oil, and fish, number 2 on the list. Eggs and dairy products and baby foods and beef also have some. There's a tiny amount in vegetable oil. The good news, fruits, vegetables, cereals, practically zero of these environmental pollutants. So they're safe to eat. They're not going to raise your risk of diabetes 38 times. Now we come to number 9, plant antioxidants. As I mentioned, high levels of antioxidants in the diet of people with diabetes can decrease eye damage, making diabetic retinopathy less likely, kidney damage, making dialysis less likely, and reduce heart attacks and strokes. When you look at people with diabetes, they tend to have poor antioxidant status, especially when blood sugar is poorly controlled. The risk of prediabetes in this study was reduced 90% with more whole plants. Diets rich in fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, and other plant foods protected against prediabetes. They contain polyphenols, which is a large class, all anti-inflammatory, many antioxidant, flavonoids like quercetin are in this group, and many others. Phytoestrogens, these are found in beans, such as dazdine and genistein, and phytoestrogens are anti-inflammatory. Sulforaphanes found in the whole cruciferous class of vegetables, so kale, broccoli, chard, cabbage, and so on. And plant sterols are antioxidant and reduce inflammation. It's from a large study. If we look at the standard American diet here, this is a slide from my Diet Doctor software, we see that the vitamin C is much lower. The top blue bar shows how much you got in this day, and the bottom bar shows how much you need at a bare minimum. And it wasn't even half the bare minimum. The vitamin E was about a third of the bare minimum. Note that only 7% at last count of Americans get even the bare minimum of vitamin E. So, of course, it's very, very likely that if you're eating a normal diet, you won't get enough vitamin E. Those walnuts I mentioned will give you very nice vitamin E, especially in the gamma tocopherol form. Looking at a whole plant diet, the antioxidants are great. The vitamin A in the form of carotenoids, very antioxidant, and were very high. The vitamin C was nicely far above 350 milligrams, versus 75 recommended, 90 for a smoker. The vitamin E also was 28 versus a 15 recommended. And all of the other vitamins were very nice on this diet too, except for vitamin B12, which I think practically everyone needs to take. I certainly do. This is the Diet Doctor software. You can email me for an analysis. That's the easiest way. Some brave people will download the software and do it themselves, but it's really kind of difficult to look through the 292,000 food choices and pick the right ones and get the amounts just right. So I do charge a fee for dietary analysis, but you can email me if you're interested. To improve the antioxidant status on the Majuro diet, they had 9 servings per day of vegetables and fruits. So lots of vegetables and fruits, like this picture. Had 2 servings a day of beans. Very good. Beans really help to fill you up and make you feel like you've gotten enough protein. Nuts, at least 1 serving a day, and seeds 1 serving a day. And then there were whole grains, 3 servings a day to meet energy needs. What about antioxidant supplements? you should plan for most of your antioxidants to come from food. During the Hawaii dementia prevention trial, we had supplements made for the study participants. When news got out, I was working at the largest neuroscience center in the Pacific with 24,000 patient visits per year. News got out that these people were getting better very quickly, and people wanted the supplements, but they couldn't get them because they were restricted to study participants. So I made this brain and body food, which includes most of the things we put in for the people to keep their brains from decaying. Actually, the brains got better during this study instead of worse. But it just happens to contain, because as I mentioned, I'm the author of a college textbook from McGraw-Hill on vitamins and minerals. It contains all of the essential vitamins and minerals in the correct forms, at the correct dosages. This is the only vitamin I take. So you might consider that. I have some problems with other multivitamins because they use a fake form of vitamin E, which could actually be slightly damaging rather than helpful. And they also can use a form of folate called folic acid that in higher levels can increase risk of cancer. You have to be very, very careful with each of these essential vitamins and minerals that they're in the right form. And I understand that the industry produces supplements for profit, and that's their only reason. I made this one for myself so that I can have something that I could recommend. I do sell it, I do make a profit, so I'll make a disclaimer there. Vitamin C is a powerful antioxidant. It might be good to get more than you can get from food. Vitamin E should be, read your label. If your supplement of vitamin E or multivitamin says RRR-alpha tocopherol form, please email me right away. I have never seen this in a health food store or grocery store, or a box store, anywhere. That's real vitamin E. It also is nice if it contains the gamma, beta, and delta tocopherol, the other real vitamin E. Vitamin A should be mostly from carotenoids. A certain amount is good to be preformed, but it should be mostly from carotenoids or from fruits and vegetables. Number 10 on the anti-diabetes diet, and I think this is important too, we need to avoid dietary contaminants that are going to pollute us. Meat has pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, heavy metals, PCBs, DDT, dioxins. Now, fried foods, when they're heated to high temperatures, not only can be rancid, they can contain oxysterols, oxidized cholesterol, and advanced glycation end products that are highly inflammatory and actually increase insulin resistance. Pro-inflammatory molecules, these advanced glycation end products, are found whenever meat, chicken, or fish are barbecued, broiled, fried, or even baked to brown, and they're found in aged cheese. In other words, animal products the way people like them. There are other byproducts of high temperature cooking to look out for. These form in animal products, but not so much in plant foods. I did just write a paper on advanced glycation end products, and then I wrote another paper on them and other sources of inflammation. These papers are about inflammation in the brain, but it's very relevant to people too. Now, advanced glycation end products can be formed in the blood when there are high levels of sugar and low levels of antioxidants. This is the problem with diabetes. This is what creates the damage in diabetes. This is what creates A1C levels that are high. However, the AGs are also formed in any animal-derived food when it's cooked at high temperatures or stored, and as I mentioned, also in aged cheeses. They increase oxidative stress and inflammation in the body. Okay, now I'm going to finish off my talk today. There may be some of you who have heard all their lives that it's only sugar that creates insulin resistance. You may have heard that insulin resistance and diabetes are created only by sugar. So I'm going to run through just kind of quickly and go easy on the science, but I want to let you know the 8 ways that saturated fats interfere with our ability to get sugar out of our bloodstream. Number 1, excess dietary saturated fats kill off the beta cells that make insulin. Study after study These studies are quoting glucolipotoxicity, gluco for sugar, lipo for fat toxicity. And this toxicity is what kills off the beta cells. Study after study after study shows this. I have 4 on the screen, and there's so many more. After a long period of time of killing off beta cells, it's harder to reverse diabetes. So in the first 10 years after diagnosis, it's a bit easier. Depends how many you've lost. So animal fats increase the circulating levels of free saturated fatty acids, and then those kill off the beta cells in the pancreas. It can be a 30 to 60% decrease in the beta cells. There's not enough left to make enough insulin. By the time diabetes is diagnosed, half of these insulin-producing cells may be gone. But if you back off in your excess fat, get your calories down to something that can maintain a good weight, this study showed over 8 weeks that beta cells can start responding again and producing insulin in response to need, relieving high blood sugar. And this is very hopeful. You might be able to revive those tired beta cells. Now, number 2 is interesting. The insulin, when it leaves the pancreas, has to travel through the bloodstream and get to the cells that need it. Muscle cells, fat cells, liver cells, all over the body. What if there are fewer insulin receptors on the cells, then they will have fewer insulin docking onto them and getting the sugar out of the bloodstream. Here's a diagram that I made. This is modeled on a diagram in my Fats and Oils Demystified book. And on the left side, you see that saturated fatty acids are straight. And there are phospholipids in the cell membrane. That's those dark circles with the 2 wiggly lines coming out. Phospholipids have 2 fatty acids. And if they're saturated, they're straight and they pack together densely. So there's less room for the insulin receptor there. That insulin receptor goes through the cell, from the outside the cell to the inside the cell. There's just less room to put them in there. On the right side of this diagram, we have a lot of unsaturated fatty acids, and they are bent. At each point of desaturation, they're bent. So you might see one that's bent once. That would be a monounsaturated fatty acid. You might see one that's bent twice. That'd be perhaps linoleic acid, one of the 2 essential fatty acids. And if they're bent several times, that's even better. They're actually bent in 3 dimensions, causing a less dense packing of these phospholipids, allowing more insulin receptors so we can get more blood sugar out of the bloodstream fast and into the cells where we need it for energy. This study showed that saturated fat reduced the number of insulin receptors by half. And insulin resistance, they say, is a factor in 95% of type 2 diabetes. I can only imagine that in the other cases of type 2 diabetes, the beta cells are completely exhausted. So virtually all cases. The number of insulin receptors can be cut in half by excess saturated fatty acids. Keep your sat fats down to 12 grams per day or less. The advice of the American Heart Association, my advice, and I think good advice. Less insulin receptors are made in the first place. There's less what's called expression of genes to create insulin receptors with more saturated fats. There are then fewer receptors in the cell membrane, and they're broken up faster if your saturated fat levels are high. So keep them low. Number 3, the insulin receptor substrate. Now, on the bottom of the insulin receptor inside the cell, when insulin triggers the outside of the cell, on the inside of the cell, you have the insulin substrate receptor that wants to lock onto it. Saturated fats interfere with this. See, when you eat saturated fats, especially if you're eating them in a meat form, meat, chicken, fish, turkey, pork, beef, this form has lipopolysaccharides and saturated fats, highly inflammatory. One study, they looked at college students, fed them 1 cheese pizza, just cheese. It raised their inflammatory cytokines 65 times just within 2 hours. Huge cytokine storm. The body's trying to protect itself against invading organisms, and this is why this happens. When you get a huge cytokine storm like that, then the suppressor of cytokine pops up to get rid of the cytokines, but that stops the insulin receptor substrate from binding and reducing blood sugar. So one study used half a cup of heavy whipping cream as a source of saturated fats, 25 grams, and also contains, of course, endotoxins. Insulin resistance was increased in all 19 women, no exceptions. The toll-like receptor 4 is a surveillance receptor inside our bloodstream in our body. It's looking for infection, but it spotted the excess saturated fats, triggered a cascade of inflammatory cytokines, and then the suppressor of cytokine 3 came along and stopped the insulin from making blood sugar go out of the bloodstream. Here's a little picture. If things go well, then this is from my book on diabetes, and insulin should lock to the insulin receptor on the outside of the cell. The little arrow shows that the insulin receptor substrate on the inside kind of docks onto that. That triggers the phosphorylation of PI3K, sorry about the big word, phosphatidylinositol 3 kinase. That phosphorylates protein kinase B. That triggers GLUT4, the glucose transport vesicle, a little bubble, to go up to the cell membrane and drink in glucose. Unless all of these things happen, you will not get glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cell. And saturated fats interfere with every step along this way. Here they are interfering. There's less insulin because the beta cells are damaged. There's fewer insulin receptors, maybe half as many, because of saturated fats in the cell membrane. The insulin receptor substrate doesn't lock on. And the PI3K, the protein kinase B, do not successfully initiate the GLUT4 to go bring in the glucose. So this is the point here. With excess sat fats interfering, the glucose transporter can't bring glucose out of the bloodstream into the cell. It's a little more complicated than you may have thought. The activity of this PI3K was decreased 60 to 75% by sat fats. Remember, without that, you don't get glucose out of the bloodstream. And excess sat fats make it harder to trigger the protein kinase B inside the cell. This is explained in my book, Diabetes Breakthrough. It's available on my website for under $10. I know I can't tell you everything today, so please get a copy and read through it, and you can find out more. And number 6, out of 8, almost done, the glucose transporter can't bring sugar from the blood into the cell. It has to open up, but the high saturated fat diet stops that. Solution? Eat 12 or less grams of sat fats per day. Read your labels, keep a little diary of the saturated fats you eat. You'd be surprised. And lower that down. Another surprise, if you successfully did this, would be your next cholesterol test. Might really surprise you in a good way. So there's another step here. When the sugar finally gets into the cell, okay, blocked everywhere by saturated fats, what your cells, especially muscle cells, want to do is take 30,000 glucose molecules and stick them in this kind of suitcase for glucose called glycogen. 30,000 of them in there. However, saturated fats can interfere with the making of glycogen. Why this is bad is that our muscles need this glycogen there. When you first are working out, your body doesn't need to reach into the bloodstream and pull glucose into the cell because it's already there stored in the glycogen structure. So people who work out a lot and all the rest of us need glycogen in the muscles ready to go, and this is interfered with by saturated fats. Solution, eat less. And last, with excess saturated fat, the liver keeps making blood sugar. It's called gluconeogenesis, sugar new making. And the liver does this if it's insulin resistance. This study used 1/3 of a cup of palm oil. All my studies are with real people. 36 grams of saturated fat. That's as much as some breakfasts at fast food places. And it increased insulin resistance, led to the liver making 70% more blood sugar. So you're making blood sugar night and day if you're eating too many saturated fats. Keeping that blood sugar high at night and all day and just on and on. So where are the high saturated fat foods? Coconut oil, 24 grams and 2 tablespoons. That's about the highest. 84 to 92% saturated fats. Spam, half a can, 18 grams. Remember, 12 is all you get. Cheddar cheese, 2 slices is 11 grams. It's a little rare to see people eat just 2 slices, but if they do, they've blown their entire day's budget for saturated fat. Fast food cheeseburger, 9 grams, typical. Milk, yogurt, ice cream, 1 cup, 5 grams. So you need to fit that in to your 12 grams per day. What about low saturated fat foods? Here's my wife's cookbook, Healthy Recipes for Friends, also available on my website. It can be either as a paper book or as an ebook. You have vegetable curry, only 2 grams, delicious, creamy. You have to be a little careful with the coconut milk in the vegetable curry. Coconut milk can have a fair amount of saturated fat, so you need to add just a little to make it creamy and not too much. Tofu, a whole cup, 1 gram, no problem. Soy milk, 1 cup, 0.5 grams. Pinto beans, 2/3 of a cup, fill you right up, 0.2 grams of saturated fat. And Swiss chard, forget it, there's none. So there are a lot of healthy, great, tasty foods that don't have a lot of saturated fat. If you're eating vegetables, beans, nuts, whole grains, and fruit, they have very little saturated fat. I say eat all you want. I do want to mention that exercise is needed. It was part of that Maduro study, and it's a good way to burn fats in general and cholesterol out of your bloodstream, and just you burn them up. Start with walking, know your aerobic pulse levels. We don't want you to go over your aerobic pulse levels because that could increase risk of a heart attack or a stroke. I want you to stay within your aerobic levels. Ask your health professional for your aerobic levels. They're based upon your age, if your heart's healthy. And if your heart's not healthy, then you should get your doctor or cardiologist to recommend safe levels. But gradually increasing exercise is a great idea, and we should all do this. The 2-week transformation in the Maduro study, who did all those 10 steps I talked about, pain disappeared in the joints, the arms, and especially in the legs. This is due to less inflammation and less eicosanoids forming pain. There's something else in meat and chicken, eggs, and fish. It's called arachidonic acid. This greatly increases inflammation. The inflammatory leukotrienes are made. They no longer needed leg massages at night to go to sleep. They had increased energy. They could walk easier. They no longer had to get up several times a night to go to the bathroom. And of course, with a nice high fiber diet, constipation no longer was an issue. I showed this once before. I just want to repeat it. Insulin, 3 people out of 30 were taking insulin. In 2 weeks, none of them needed it. Blood sugar lowering meds like metformin, 27 were taking it. In 2 weeks, only 5 needed it. This highlights that if you are going to go on improved diet and you're going to make a lot of changes, you need to have your doctor involved, or at least a pharmacist, so someone who can adjust your drug levels to your current need. Cholesterol drugs, 13 people were taking. Only 2 weeks later, only 1 needed cholesterol drugs. So instead of statins, they're eating less saturated fat and more whole plant food. High blood pressure pills, 11 were starting off, only 1 needed it later. Imagine if everyone in the country did this, the amount we'd save on drug bills. Pretty significant, wouldn't it? One more, Fred Heine. I suffered a stroke because of my diabetes and was in a wheelchair, could not walk. After joining the diabetes wellness program for 6 months, I got rid of my wheelchair and I'm walking on my own again. I'm healthier than I've been in many years. This program has given me more than I ever thought possible. It provides the people of the Marshall Islands with the greatest hope we've ever had. Kind of inspiring to see that. If you go on this program, will diabetes come back? Well, those who continue the program continue the benefits. Their blood sugar stayed low. There were some people on this program and a lot of the other studies who went through the program, lowered their blood pressure, and went back to donuts. Those who reverted to their former habits, reverted to diabetes, their blood sugar went up, they had to take more drugs, and of course their blood cholesterol, their blood pressure, lots of things went up. Could it work for you? Well, you are the one making the changes. You are the one controlling your diet. I can't do it. Your nurse, your doctor, your dietitian, they can't control what you eat. We can all teach you about it and help you through it, but you're the one who makes the decision. I'm empowering you to make this decision, and I hope you do. That concludes my talk today. This is my book, Diabetes Breakthrough. drsteveblake.com is where to go to get it. And that's under $10 for the ebook. And then the papers are all free. See recent papers under the photos on my website. And they're right there.
You talked about the fat causing diabetes. Is that message getting through, one, to the medical complex, and two, to the general public?
Well, please don't say fat. Say saturated fat. There is a difference.
Okay.
Only some fats are saturated, and those are the ones we have to watch out for. Monounsaturated fats do not stiffen the cell membrane and create less insulin receptors. Polyunsaturated fats actually loosen the cell membrane and create more insulin receptors. In each and every way, saturated fats are the bad ones, whereas polyunsaturated fatty acids are generally helpful in each of these areas. So we have to be very careful not to say fats are a problem, because I know a lot of your speakers will say just that, but it is the saturated fats that are the problem.
So what happens if we eat too much unsaturated fat? Will that, what are the consequences of that?
Probably get fat.
Okay.
I mean, there's a limit to everything. Things should be in moderation. In my book, Fats and Oils Demystified, I talk about how much of each you should get. The two essential fatty acids, ideally, we'd get about 9 grams of linoleic acid, the omega-6 essential fatty acid, and 3 grams of alpha-linolenic acid, the omega-3 essential fatty acid. And I do talk for a whole chapter about how those get made into EPA and DHA and how our bodies can do it if we're properly nourished.
Okay, so that's actually, a big question that we have. Dr. Furman talks about that there are issues with converting DHA to EPA. So he recommends supplementation. In your book, what do you talk about with regard to that? What you said, we can do it correctly. What is that correct way?
Okay. Oh, that's a really good question. And it's so common. So we can produce EPA in our bodies, and then from that create DHA. And the way that happens is we eat enough alpha-linolenic acid, say flax seeds, walnuts, sources of that, and not too much of the omega-6, which if you eat a lot of plant oils, or if you eat any kind of meat, fat, or animal fat, then you're going to get too much omega-6. So that's step one in making our own EPA. Don't get too much of those omega-6s and get enough of the omega-3s. The alpha-linolenic acid is 18 carbons long. It has 3 points of desaturation at points 3, 6, and 9. Okay, so delta 6 desaturase reaches in from the delta end from 18 down to 12 and desaturates it again. Okay, now it's 3, 6, 9, and 12. Okay, then elongase makes it from 18, stretches it out to 20, and then delta 5 desaturase reaches in from the 20 end down to 15. Now you have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 5 points of desaturation, 20 carbons long. That is the exact definition of EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, where penta is the 5 and icosa means 20. So you're making your own in your body. What do you need to do this? You need vitamin B3. You need vitamin B6. You need vitamin B12. You need calcium and magnesium in reasonable quantities. You need also, it's best if you're not exposed to a lot of industrial pollutants, because those can damage your liver. So if we're well nourished, yes, we can make EPA, and then making DHA is just a couple of steps more. So we can and do make enough if we're well nourished. The reasons why we might not want to take EPA or DHA in a pill form is that typically they're made from fish oil. So 2 problems. One, they're heavily polluted. Polychlorinated biphenyls, organochlorine pesticides, dioxin, a long list of very, very bad chemicals in fish oil. They're the most polluted. Some companies try to eliminate some of those pollutants And they do eliminate some of those pollutants, but all no, not a chance. The other problem, now you can get rid of that problem by eating algae-based oils. And some of the speakers will say, get your EPA and DHA from algae. That's who makes it anyway. The fish all get it from algae. Why shouldn't we? So that takes away the pollutant standpoint. But when they process the algae or the fish, these are the most fragile fatty acids on the planet. And they go rancid when they're cooked. So when they cook the fish, when they cook the algae, when it's stored, oxygen, light, heat create rancidity. These are the most fragile fatty acids on the planet. So they will go rancid. One study showed 91% were rancid coming out of the factory. So even algae oil is likely to be rancid, if not polluted. And fish oil, both polluted and rancid. This is why I recommend be well nourished, get enough omega-3 in the alpha-linolenic acid, not too much omega-6, and make your own. This is the optimal way to do it. If for some reason you can't be well nourished, we work with people in old age homes who just don't eat really healthy food, and they may need that kind of supplementation.
So so I understand it in layman's terms, you talk about B3, B6, B12, calcium, and all that stuff. If we're eating the diet that you were talking about, where we're getting the omega-3, the omega-3s in there, walnuts, flaxseed, chias, and then we're eating all of the other plants, the leafy greens, the vegetables, and all that type of stuff, we should be pretty safe? Or is there something that we specifically that we might be deficient in as far as the food category that we need to?
Yes. Well, you're asking someone who's analyzes diets constantly.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at the nutrients in the diets. Vitamin D3, niacin, yeah, it's usually okay on a plant-based diet. Vitamin B6, usually okay on a plant-based diet. Vitamin B12, always low on a plant-based diet, and we should supplement. Calcium is almost always low on a plant-based diet. And supplementation is something I do. Now, I have a trick. I just take my own brain and body food. It has all of those things in it. So I don't have to worry about, amounts or quantities or anything. I just take the brain and body food, and I know I'm getting all of that. There's some micronutrients in there too. Several micronutrients also needed for proper desaturation and elongation. And so it's good to have them all. Nuts and seeds will help with those micronutrients. A variety of nuts and seeds can help with like a zinc and iron and magnesium and some of those.
So B12, there's always this question, and I get 3 different answers on it. But with regard to methyl cobalamin and cyanocobalamin, or it doesn't matter. Where do you come down on that question?
Well, it's an interesting question too. And at first, looking at the two, methylcobalamin and cyanocobalamin are both forms of vitamin B12, which is cobalamin. And when you eat them, they're broken apart and you absorb the cobalamin, which is very difficult. It's a long story. But one reason that I like methylcobalamin is that if there's cyanide in your system, it will help to flush it, whereas a cyanocobalamin does not. And so I prefer it that way. The cyanocobalamin is more stable in formulas. So manufacturers who are manufacturing only for profit will use the more stable form and use less of it. It's cheaper. They make more profit. So I do use the methylcobalamin form in my brain and body food. I put in 200 micrograms per day, and that is my only source of vitamin B12. I mean, I eat absolutely zero animal foods. I've been plant-based for 55 years. And so when my blood tests come back with lots of vitamin B12, I know the methylcobalamin is working. However, I read studies where they use cyanocobalamin, which is typical for studies, and they still raise the B12 in blood. So that can work too. So both are possible. My preferred form, if you're a smoker, I would say definitely methylcobalamin, because the cyanide in cigarette smoke is a problem, and this can help to relieve that problem. There are other sources of cyanide too, and why not eat the best source? That's how I feel about it.
I said I have a feeling that if you're a smoker, you're not too concerned about your B12, but I was just I was just making a light joke.
Possibly there could be other bad health habits
Yes.
go along with smoking. Yeah.
Yes. So what is the relationship between diabetes and dementia? Does diabetes happen first and then you get dementia kind of from a diabetic body, or do they happen simultaneously and they're both manifestations of the same pathology? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's not the same pathology at all. They're not the same. The actually, I've studied how insulin works in the brain, and it works completely different than it works outside of the brain. It's really completely different. The idea of type 3 diabetes doesn't work at all if you study how insulin works in the brain. That's not the problem with dementia. Dementia, the problem is that people are losing brain cells. Okay. They're losing brain cells because of environmental toxicants that are damaging the brain cells. For instance, in Parkinson's disease, there are specific environmental toxicants that are killing off dopamine producing cells. And then in Alzheimer's disease, basically you're getting too many industrial pollutants and too few antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. This is where the whole food plant diet really comes in, loaded with antioxidants, loaded with anti-inflammatories. The end result of how brain cells die in an advanced Alzheimer's disease, you're looking at half of the brain cells dead. So when someone says they're going to restore someone from advanced Alzheimer's disease, this is just not possible. Half of the brain cells are dead. How did they die? Oxidation. They were killed off by having too few antioxidants and too much inflammation to increases. So several of my recent papers have been on neuroinflammation, brain inflammation, and how to stop that with food. And it's pretty simple. It's a whole plant diet and stay away from the animal-derived foods. Diabetes is completely different. That's about eating too much sugar and not being able to get the sugar out of the bloodstream because of saturated fats. Saturated fats also are a risk factor, of course, for dementia. Vascular dementia is almost always coexistent with any other form of dementia, like Alzheimer's disease. Vascular dementia induced by saturated fats, clogged arteries, tiny strokes in the brain. This is vascular dementia. Strokes also related to saturated fats and dementia, and again, plaque breaking away and creating strokes. So it is the foods that are damaging us in different ways. The same food in this case, maybe saturated fats, excess, are giving us diabetes and dementia.
So with regards to what you said about Alzheimer's, where by the time you have advanced Alzheimer's, half the brain cells are gone. We've had people say that the symptoms were able to be somewhat mitigated. Is that possible? Without maybe restoring, half the brain back, you can mitigate the symptoms?
Well, I think that if we're talking about, okay, let's start normal brain of aging, a little forgetful. Where are my keys? Make a list to go to the store. Okay, that's one thing. Then mild cognitive impairment, the precursor to dementia, where people progress from mild cognitive impairment into dementia. Perhaps 15% of them per year will graduate to dementia. Then we're talking early Alzheimer's disease, during which there is definitely a chance to help both with symptoms and with memory. And in my study, which is the very beginning of that, the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial, they were at 19 out of 30 on the mini mental status exam. And at the end of 9 months, they were at 29 out of 30, so high normal. So in very early Alzheimer's disease, reversal of symptoms and of health is very possible. But as you progress to moderate Alzheimer's disease, it becomes very, very difficult. Just like with after 1 or 2 strokes, it's very difficult, or after 1 or 2 heart attacks, it's difficult. We want to get people before this happens. I really want to encourage people to stay healthy and avoid dementia, avoid diabetes, and all of the other chronic diseases, as many of your speakers have put it very eloquently.
So if we are eating a whole food plant-based diet, an appropriate one, and we are, we're exercising, we're getting good sleep, we are mitigating our stress, do we need to fear getting diabetes? Is there other factors where and I'm supplementing with B12 appropriately? Is there other things that can just all of a sudden we still get dementia despite doing everything right?
If you add keeping saturated fats below 12 grams to everything you just said, then I'll say, no, I'm not worried about it. And there are whole populations who don't get diabetes, who are very susceptible to it. For instance, in Hawaii, there didn't used to be any diabetes. Now it's rampant. And what changed? It's not the genes of the people, it's the food they eat.
And how much, I didn't see on your slide, how much is there saturated fat in avocados?
There's a little saturated fat in avocados, but here's the thing. You get 12 grams for free every day, so don't worry about it. If you're getting maybe 2 grams of saturated fat eating a nice juicy avocado, okay, you've eaten 2 of your 12 for the day, no problem. And then if you eat some chocolate and you eat another 3 or 4, uh-oh, wait a minute, you're still only up to 5 or 6, so you're okay for the day. And then later in the day, you eat some nuts and seeds or some peanut butter or something, and you wind up getting up to 11 or 12, no problem. But if you go over that, then you want to look at how you can just slim it back down. Of course, when normal Americans on a normal American diet look at it, they're eating 12 grams several times each meal. So it's going to be harder for them to slim down their saturated fats. But there are substitutes. My wife's cooking books really help with that too.
So you talked about fiber, and on the slide, it said between 30 and 50 milligrams of
No,
fiber.
30, 50 grams.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, yes, grams. And you said then you recommended 40 would be ideal or above 40. So our last speaker, Milton Mills, played a video from Michael Greger, where he went into like the history of finding fossilized, I forget what the name of what it's called, but fossilized stool,
Yeah.
right?
Fossilized poop. Yes, I saw that.
Yes. I wish I had the fancy name for it, but and they said that the specimen, if you will, showed that these people were eating somewhere over 100 grams of fiber a day. Also, there are populations in Africa that are eating over 100 grams a day. Is that where we should actually be, whether or not we can get there? And would that
I
convert?
don't think so, Michael. I don't think that that's reasonable. For example, when you look at children, they can't get enough calories and protein and other nutrients they need if they have too high a fiber diet. So some of their foods need to be a little lower in fiber. And that may be true for older folks too, whose digestion isn't so strong that they can actually digest a huge amount of fiber. And we're talking about fiber from whole plant foods now, not added fiber. So it really is, I have pegged 40 grams per day as optimal. 20 grams per day is the RDA for fiber. I analyzed the carnivore diet. Can you guess how much fiber was in that one?
I'm gonna say not very much, maybe 10 grams.
0. I've never seen that
Oh, the
before.
carnivore diet. Okay,
Carnivore diet.
all meat, just like all meat.
All meat. The Atkins diet blew me away when I saw it was only 3 grams of fiber. They're probably going to the bathroom at least once a week on that. But it's not enough. And a lot of the diets that I see out there, I analyze all of them. And a lot of times the fiber is very low. So no, 100 grams would be too much for most modern digestions. Perhaps a super fit person could do it, but you couldn't be too fit because you're going to need more calories and more food to get in there. And remember, fiber does not have food value. Its value is to go into the intestines. And so you don't get carbohydrates or protein from fiber.
Okay.
You don't get fats from fiber. So there's nothing to make energy from fiber. So you also need those other foods. So I would still stick with my 40 would be healthiest, 20 is the minimum. But going over 60, I think is, I've seen it, and especially in some raw food vegan diets that I've analyzed, they've gone over 60 and they're okay with that because it's mostly fruit and vegetables and they seem to do well, but they're usually younger and stronger and can take it. So I think over 100 would just be too much for our digestions to handle. Plus you'd need a porta potty.
Is it possible that the reason that they had 100 grams, or I think it was like even more, like 120 grams, is because their food is, these plants that they were eating weren't so dense in those other nutrients, so they needed to consume so much food, and in so doing, consume so much fiber, and they
Yeah,
basically were
sure,
eating all day. Okay.
sure, of course. Yeah,
Uh,
they're eating fibrous plant foods, and they do have to eat a lot to get calories because after all, fiber doesn't have any calories.
okay. So so dates. I don't know if I saw that on your slide. How are dates with regard to sugar? And how are dates with regard to fiber?
They have some fiber, they have some sugar. The sugar's fairly slow releasing. I've seen a lot of studies on dates for diabetics, and it's what diabetics do is they test their blood sugar after they eat something and find out how much it increases their blood sugar. So you could see how sensitive you are to it. Personally, if a relative had diabetes, I would not recommend dates. There are many other sweeteners out there that are non-caloric. So, stevia, any of the various sweeteners out there might be a little bit better than dates. But dates would be one of the healthiest plant-based whole food sweeteners that I can think of for everyone, just would need to be limited with a diabetic. Now, if that diabetic's low in saturated fat, they might be able to eat a whole date and not raise their blood sugar because the blood sugar would then go right out into their cells and not be stuck in the blood circulation, which is the whole point of my talk.
Mhm.
Erythritol is much safer. Xylitol is the old one.
Okay.
Erythritol is a sweetener, slightly minty, non-caloric sweetener that is fun to use in baked goods and anything you want to sweeten. And it has 0 calories. So for diabetics, it's very easy. It comes in a white powder form, so it can substitute for sugar. It is not as sweet as sugar. It's maybe about half as sweet. So you have to use a little bit more if you want to get the sweetness up there. But you never raise your blood sugar with it. So for diabetics, it's a nice way to go. I like dates. If you're not diabetic, I think they're a great way to sweeten things. If you chop them up and put them, say, in oatmeal, it's wonderful. I have no problem with otherwise.
And is erythritol I know you can get it on its own, but it's also commonly packaged in a 1-to-1 ratio with monk fruit. How's monk fruit?
Monk fruit could be okay, but I mean, erythritol is simpler. It's a different thing.
Okay.
Erythritol, it's made.
And then you mentioned there was I think the fat recommendation per day was 20 to 25%.
Yes.
T. Colin Campbell talks about if you're just getting fat from plants, what you would normally get is I think the number was between 8 and 12%. And he said that's totally fine. What are your thoughts? Is that way too low? What are your thoughts on that?
It's not a thought, it's an analysis of, I feel like if I was rich, I'd say, send me a diet with 8 to 12% of calories as fat, and that satisfies the human needs for essential fatty acids and vitamin E and carotenoid absorption and give you a very, very large amount of money. Can't be done. It simply can't be done. So
That's
yes, you can
I
eat
want to
8 to
eat more fat, so
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, you want more fat anyway because avocados and nuts and all those things are very satisfying. But what you really don't want to do is get the total fat so low that you cannot achieve the required nutrients for human beings. Okay, so when I did my analysis, where you need a minimum of 17% of calories as fat just to achieve the 2 essential fatty acids and the bare minimum of vitamin E, people are basically eating almost exclusively flax seeds and walnuts in order to get there. And that's not a realistic diet. You're going to need to eat a few other foods too. So 20 to 25% is the healthiest possible amount of total fats to get in the diet. And I know that there are many doctors in the very low fat camp. I could name their names, so could you. And sometimes we jokingly call them the fat police. And they're talking about this 10% of calories as fat. First of all, when I analyze their diets, they're not 10% of calories. They're always more because, as you mentioned, people crave fat. We want some fat in our diet. And then even if they recommend that, people are going to cheat because they want some fat anyway. So to get proper nutrition is my goal. I want you to get the bare minimum, at least, of vitamin E. I'd like you to get more. And you absolutely must have the essential fatty acids to make the eicosanoids that make everything work for pain and inflammation and blood flow and all the things that these eicosanoids do that are made from them. We need those. So that's where I got the 20 to 25%.
If you were able to do that lower fat diet, what are and therefore have issues from that, what are the clinical symptoms that you would expect someone to have, letting them know they need to eat more fat?
Well, the symptoms of low vitamin E and those diets, when I analyzed the low diets like dear old Dr. McDougall diet, 5 milligrams of vitamin E, 15 milligrams is the bare minimum. It'd be great if you got at least double that. But 5, the symptoms you're going to get is your LDL circulating your bloodstream are going to oxidize because they don't have vitamin E. And they're going to stick to the inside of the artery. Foam cells will attack them. Atherosclerotic plaque will build up. Strokes and heart attacks will become more common. The vitamin E will not implant in your brain cells to protect them from dying off, as we mentioned. So you're losing brain cells on that diet. So I wouldn't expect immediate symptoms. It's going to take some time for the stroke, the heart attack, the dementia to develop. But that's not what I want. That's not what you want.
So on a whole food plant-based diet that is too low in vitamin E, you would still have serious health ramifications such as dementia.
It's an essential nutrient. It's
Okay.
essential. It means you need it. You can't make it. You have to have it. And this one is extremely important. I would say, yeah, well, they're all important. You need every one of them.
All right, so somebody who ate basically sprouts, and I hate that I'm I don't mean to belabor the point. If someone ate sprouts and like sprouted greens and lentils, they would not be able to get enough fat in their diet, and they could end up getting dementia. Is that
If they just ate what kind of sprouts?
like like the broccoli sprouts and like the stuff that you sprout at home, like the sprouted greens.
I'd be interested to analyze that diet. I would suspect that the calories would be very low. The protein might be okay if they ate enough of those sprouts. I've analyzed raw food diets. When they do bean sprouts on raw food diets, ooh, it really buffs out their nutrition beautifully. That's really important. Beans are important on a whole food plant diet anyway. They really ease out, and they have the anti-inflammatories in order to protect our brains and our arteries and our eyes and our kidneys and all the other places that diabetes attacks. So beans are really important, whether sprouted or not. But analyzing a diet of just a couple of sprouts, I think there's going to be some deficiencies there. I would need to analyze the exact diet.
Great. And what are the most common misconceptions that you see within the medical community and within the public with regard to diabetes?
Well, I think the common misconception is that diabetes is caused by high amounts of sugar, that carbs are the bad guys, and carbs cause diabetes, and a complete ignorance of the role of saturated fats in this. As I said, I was delighted to hear just today that Kaiser made their first recommendation for diabetics: eat less saturated fat. Isn't that fantastic? The science is finally penetrating, and they're going to save a lot of money on that as people need less anti-diabetic drugs and less surgery and all that. It's really exciting. So I think that's the main misconception. Oh, another one that I really don't like is don't eat any fruit if you're diabetic. And this is a common misconception by both health professionals and people. I showed you the glycemic load of the fruits. And many of the fruits that we commonly eat, apples and berries, are very low glycemic load. They're not going to increase blood sugar at all. I mean, extremely small increase in blood sugar, nothing to bother you. So maybe it moves your blood sugar from 70 to 71, and you can go up to 100 before you get diabetic. This is not a problem. So this is a misconception I think really needs to be fixed, because those fruits have antioxidants and anti-inflammatories that are powerfully effective in exactly stopping the damage that diabetics get in their arteries and their eyes, their brains, and their kidneys.
So when talking to people about going whole food plant-based, what do you find are the challenges with someone actually beginning that process?
Well, I think habit is the biggest challenge. And we work with people who are normally very American diet people who want their memory to stop decaying. And we talk to them about what they eat. And our first step is to introduce foods that are similar to what they're eating now, but a little better. So, for instance, people like to eat eggs, but eggs have a lot of cholesterol. And when they're cooked, the oxidized cholesterol damages their brain. They have saturated fats and lots of fat, and they're not healthy at all. But people are very used to eating them for breakfast. This is breakfast, it's eggs. Okay. So we introduce them to Just Eggs. Just Eggs is made from mung beans. It comes in little patties or as a liquid for scrambled eggs. And people try it and they say, well, that was great. That, you know, it was fine. I don't mind. It satisfied my hunger. It tasted just like eggs, and I'm good with that. So step by step, we lead people, and when they start feeling better, they're more willing to make changes, and then we can move that up to perhaps a healthier breakfast yet. The oatmeal with avocado and berries, and that would be healthier than Just Eggs. And so step by step, people can change. I think that we're creatures of habit, and people are used to a burger at night. They can try a Beyond Burger. They always love the Beyond Burger. It's usually someone else cooking for dementia people. And so they serve them the Beyond Burger. They say, this is a delicious burger. They may or may not even realize that it's not meat. And the Beyond Burgers typically have too much saturated fat. I mean, 6 to 9 grams of saturated fat in each burger is too much sodium too. But they're delicious and they get them moving along. And then we can move them along to the next step. So it needn't be a crash course. We can take a little time. We can move along. Would I like it if everyone changed to a whole food plant diet? Yeah, I'd like that. But I realize also that there's families involved too. There's households, there's old age homes, and it's difficult to change everyone's food right away too. The best results we get are when someone in the family takes charge and starts buying and cooking healthier food for whoever is ill.
So during the talk, you focused on diet. You mentioned exercise briefly. What are the roles of sleep and stress with both diabetes and dementia, for that matter?
I haven't studied the role of stress in diabetes. As sleep and diabetes, I have not studied those. In dementia, we look at that very carefully. For example, if someone comes into the clinic for their neuropsychological evaluation and they are stressed out or anxious, they're going to get much lower scores than if they're relaxed and comfortable. And we know that anxiety can interfere with clear thinking. I mean, we all know that, and it really does. And and good sleep, of course, is essential too. And in fact, good food before you go for your neuropsychological evaluation is a really, really good idea too. We encourage people to eat right before, and if they normally drink coffee, go ahead and drink it so their brains are as sharp as possible when we test them.
So with regard to coffee, so are you saying that coffee is like neuroprotective? Is it good for you? Or if they're a coffee drinker and they haven't had their coffee, they may just need their caffeine fix.
Yeah, if they're a habitual coffee drinker and they come in to get tested without the coffee, they're not going to test very well. I'm not going to encourage people to drink coffee who don't drink coffee, but if it's their normal routine, I would expect them to do that in order to continue. Now, coffee does have some antioxidants, and it can be helpful in that way. It also is very commonly heavily sprayed with pesticides, grown in the tropics and sprayed heavily. So when those pesticides are roasted, they can cause some very bad compounds to occur. So I encourage people, if they're going to drink organic coffee. And that way, they're not going to get the roasted pesticides in their cup. So, and in that case, coffee in reasonable quantities has mostly good effects on dementia. And tea has better effects on dementia.
Does cholesterol play a role in insulin resistance?
Cholesterol?
Cholesterol, yes.
It plays a role. Okay, there's dietary cholesterol and then there's blood cholesterol. And they both play a role in dementia for sure.
Mm.
Dietary cholesterol, say an egg is like a cholesterol bomb. And when you cook it, you get all these oxidized sterols. Oxysterols are called, oxidized cholesterol. And they can actually travel through the blood-brain barrier into the brain. Cholesterol cannot. But when it's oxidized, it can. So it's transparent because the brain, that's how it gets rid of excess cholesterol. And so it's transparent to that. And this can cause a lot of damage and inflammation, leading to cell death. That's how the brains get shrinking in Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. This is scary stuff. And so dietary cholesterol, a perfect amount would be 0. That's how much I eat, exactly 0 dietary cholesterol. My body, however, makes 70 quadrillion molecules of cholesterol every second. So I'm not really suffering from low cholesterol. Everybody makes cholesterol in their bodies, both for hormones and to stiffen cell membranes to the perfect amount. We make the perfect amount. If we eat any, it's too much.
So you mentioned coconut milk, don't have too much coconut milk. It's very high in saturated fat. A common cream that people use in the plant-based world is cashew cream. How is that as far as saturated fat, and can it be used somewhat liberally?
Yeah, check your label. Cashew cream is low in saturated fat unless they're adding coconut oil to the product, which is very common. So you need to check the label, see how much saturated fat. If there's 1 gram of saturated fat in a tablespoon and you add that to something, then put that down on your day. Okay, one of my 12 has been used up.
So you mentioned that I'm sorry, you mentioned that that dementia is not type 3 diabetes. Why do people think, why do the doctors say that dementia is type 3 diabetes? Where are they getting it wrong?
There can become a difficulty in getting glucose into blood cells, into neurons in the brain. And that difficulty in energy getting in, they're damaged. The brain cells are damaged, and they have trouble getting the glucose into them and trouble utilizing the glucose, which is why some people say, well, if you eat lots of coconut oil, then you're going to start burning ketones. There are 3 ketones that people use, ketone bodies, and beta hydroxybutyrate is one. Did you know acetone is one? The very same acetone that takes off nail polish. That is one of the 3 ketones. So they want to encourage people to have lots of acetone in their blood. And there's only 3 of these ketone bodies that are burned for energy. Yes, in a short term, some of these damaged brain cells can burn these ketone bodies. But long term, the excess saturated fat is going to destroy the brain. It's definitely not good for diabetes, the heart, the strokes, all of it is extremely bad and lacking in the essential nutrients. There's only 2 nuts that don't have vitamin E, and coconut's one of them. Macadamia nut's the other one, by the way.
So
They're
delicious.
very tasty for entertainment. They just don't have any vitamin E.
So, last question as we're getting ready to wrap up. Um, are governmental guidelines moving in the right direction with regard to diabetes, with regard to health in general, dementia? What are your thoughts on that?
That's funny. I'm glad you have a sense of humor.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm a foolish optimist. How about that?
Oh yeah, everything should be good any day now. For that food plate should be just all plant foods any day now. As soon as the food industry quits donating to them. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of confidence. I think we need to make these choices ourselves. We need to protect ourselves. We need to learn ourselves. And I'm a scientist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a medical scientist. And so I want science to be used, because when you use science, check what I said in my diabetes talk. Check the references I use. Make sure they say what I said. And then go to those references and see where they got the information. Go check those references. Dig down the chain and make sure the information is correct. That's because in this day of untruths, quasi-truths, and no truths, we need to check and verify the truth, both about our food and about everything else.
And just real briefly, I don't know if you know about the Canadian guidelines. Have you seen them? I think Brenda Davis had some impact on there. If you have seen them, any thoughts on the guidelines coming out of Canada?
They were a little bit better, but they're still not what I would put out as guidelines for diet. You know, they're not saying just don't eat any animal products. Okay, none. And when they say that, I'll be happy. What can I say? There are other influences besides health at work in those guidelines.
Well, we'll have to save that for another
Brenda
conversation.
Davis is great. I really respect her work, and she really knows her stuff.
All right, beautiful. Yeah, she is really great. All right, great. Thank you so much. That concludes our time. I really appreciate all the information and all the answers that you provided us. If we can unmute the audience, please, so they can share their appreciation for Dr. Blake.
Burger.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Blake.
Awesome.
Dr. Blake.
Thank you.
Dr. Blake.
Thank you.
Dr. Blake.